Well, first I'd like to thank Paul for responding to my video in a very thoughtful way, and I do stand corrected. Paul experienced that art world very directly in his life. I was only pretty much aware of it all that happened when I was in grade school. So a lot of my opinions of art, and we can get into that. Opinions, whatever. It come from my architectural background in a Bauhaus kind of inspired program. So I was kind of steeped in that, and when I was a young man, that modernist kind of international style worldview, kind of set the tone for my thinking about art. And one of the famous examples that was very part of my education was this Pierre Mondrian painting progression, where you see kind of the initial trees done, where he's abstracted the geometric elements, or at least translated the organic forms of a tree into a geometric structure that's very becomes increasingly over time in his development more angular, until at some point you get the blue squares and the little yellow triangles, or not triangles, but the grid, with the colors in it. That was reflected actually in our architectural program. There was this class called Visual Studies, and this was over a couple semesters in the freshman year as part of the Bauhaus training that remained in the program, kind of a legacy program, and students would arrange just what happens with just the arrangement and proportions of a vertical line and a horizontal line. That's it. And then various widths of strips, location, just horizontal and vertical, two lines, but the width and what. So it's supposed to give you training and sort of a visual awareness of proportion, just purely as proportion. And then there were like color boards with textures that you would do, and try to create a composition entirely out of tiles of texture. Yeah. So I guess, when I talk about the experiments of the 20th century, I'm seeing it from that perspective, which in the fine arts has ultimately culminated in hospitality art in any hospital or hotel lobby, and that's what ABEX to me is. So Paul's right to call me out. I was probably in my last video a little gracious towards contemporary art of that nature, and the value and its contribution, especially when he pointed out artists like Cecily Brown and whatnot. When I was learning to paint in the 90s, if you're learning to paint, you have to have the discipline of learning to paint depictively. I mean, there's just, otherwise you won't gain the skills. That discipline. There may be another way, but some Bauhaus training of colors and stuff, but I don't think ultimately those are successful. It wasn't successful for me. I had to limit myself to that depictive, and so I was learning to paint, and I was learning about the Art Renewal Center and some of the things that were contemporary to and relevant to painting at that time, because it was part of the discussion of people in the classroom. And this was a private class, but it was in a printmaking studio that also shared a space with an artist who was, a middle-aged woman, had studio space, and she did these abstract canvases. And I don't know if she ever sold any or whatnot, but she had a studio, and she would sit there and ponder and play one color off of another. And when Paul's talking about the prestige, people borrowing the prestige of art, I think that's the kind of thing that was going on there. There are people who just want to think of themselves as an artist or whatever, and they're doing a practice, and it's perhaps a aesthetic contemplation or whatever. It has value to them, and so I'm not trying to disrespect that, but it's, to me, I'm with Paul. It doesn't really have anything to do with painting. You could be doing something else. You could be arranging a Zen garden or something, right? You're just using the materials of fine art to do some kind of meditative practice, and then telling your doctor husband that you need more studio space and whatnot. And look, I wouldn't say that was kind of a common thing when I was learning to paint, where a lot of middle-aged women with rich husbands who were exploring their artistic side. Be that as it may, I was just a guy, and I wanted to learn how to paint. And so I was exposed to a lot of that ab-ex pretense. And I get it. At the same time, I think there is something to the Bauhaus treatment. And it in the sense that cognitively you're starting to produce art for industry. And when you see artists, or if you go onto like artist forums, there's a lot of digital artists, there's a lot of graphic artists, a lot of people are interested in anime. Fantastic. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was learn how to draw like make Astro Boy, right, or something. I could see myself as a young child becoming an animator. That was something I could aspire to. And yet at the same time, this is artistic, but it's in the service of industry. And so as I'm learning my own practice of painting, because I'm not part of an art market, so I'm not, I paint for what I want to see. That's it. I paint what I want to see. If I sell something, that's great, but I really don't care. I'm not part of an art market. I don't want to be part of an art market necessarily, but I do want to understand painting. I want to understand painting. And to me, I see the more profitable direction to do that, and nobody's stopping me, right? Like Paul says, what's stopping you from making the art you want to make? A lot of things, actually. And part of the struggle of being an artist is shedding all the bullshit that we've accumulated over time about what good art has in it and doesn't have in it, and what it consists of and what it looks like. And getting back to the craft of doing something and doing it well. And painting is too deep. It's hard to talk about. It's chemically, it's alchemy, the mixtures, and it's a sensual endeavor. You're dealing with the lusciousness of the materials and the smells and the kinesthetic joy of putting a smear someplace and like moving it around. It's just, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it when it works. It can be very frustrating too. And there's that. One of the things that I was always very suspicious of is narrative, because I don't want my paintings to become a comic book. And at the same time, I know that historically painting, there's been a lot of narrative painting and illustration. And as I study that in art history, I also see that a lot of that corresponds to how a society thinks, right? So you see the I forget, the Visipiscus or something. It's that's the two intersecting circles. I can never pronounce it. Of sacred geometry and the way it forms trinities and triangles and hexagons and all those beautiful Gothic windows. That art comes out of a world view of the unity and eternity of a system. And we've kind of gone through an industrial revolution and the Enlightenment. We don't think like that anymore. I can't do the mercy seat. I don't have the cognitive architecture to paint the mercy seat. At least not the way they would in the Middle Ages. It wouldn't be authentic. I do landscapes and I put a lot into them. I really do. But I want to go further. Yeah. But I want to go further, and I think these conversations with Paul will help me with that. And if other people benefit, that's great.